like a river flowing through centuries, never changing its course, so too does the human soul remain constant in its depths, despite all external changes. In ancient times, when the world seemed simpler and truths clearer, a philosophy was born that taught people to find peace not in the silence of temples, but in the storm of everyday life. This was a time when Rome stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the burning sands of Egypt, when emperors ruled the fates of millions, while philosophers ruled the fates of emperors. A time when a slave could become a sage, and the richest man in the empire could preach simplicity. When rulers of the greatest power on earth wrote letters to themselves about how to remain human amid inhuman authority. In the marble porticoes of Athens, where echoes of ancient debates still drift in air scented with olives and sea, arose a teaching that promised no easy life, but offered something greater: inner freedom. Philosophers in simple tunics taught what could fit in no treasury: the art of being happy regardless of fate's whims. Their names have reached us through millennia. Zeno, a merchant who lost everything in a shipwreck and found wisdom. Epictetus, a slave who became freer than his masters. Seneca, a millionaire who learned the riches of the soul. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of half the world, contemplating the transience of power by the light of campaign fires. But what united such different people? What secret lay behind their calm in the face of any trial? And why does their ancient wisdom sound so contemporary in our days, full of anxiety and uncertainty? Sometimes truth is born in the most unexpected places, not in temples, not in palaces, but where a person remains alone with themselves and questions that give no peace. In ancient Athens, where marble columns reflected the gold of the setting sun, where air was filled with the scent of olive groves and sounds of unhurried debates, a philosophy was born that changed understanding of what it means to be free. Imagine this city: narrow streets where every stone holds memories of centuries, squares where merchants display their goods under morning sun, while philosophers gather in the shade of porticoes to speak of what truly matters. Here, amid the noise of daily life, questions rang out that touched the very essence of human existence. Zeno of Citium came to Athens not as a philosopher. He was a trader, a practical man, accustomed to concrete affairs and clear decisions. But life sometimes turns so unexpectedly that everything familiar collapses like a house of cards. Zeno's ship was wrecked. Along with his goods, his plans sank to the bottom, his vision of the future, his confidence in tomorrow. But sometimes, loss becomes a gift. Finding himself in Athens without money, without the burden of former obligations, Zeno first heard the reading of philosophical texts. The words of ancient sages touched something deep in his soul. He understood that he had been seeking the wrong thing. Not wealth, not success in the usual sense, but something greater, something that could not drown with a ship. Zeno became a student, then a teacher. He gathered people in a painted portico that the Greeks called stoa poikile. From this word came the name of the new philosophy, Stoicism. But the name is not important. What matters is what he spoke about under those ancient columns. He spoke of how a person cannot control what happens to them, cannot command storms, cannot stop time, cannot force other people to act as they wish. But there is one realm where a person remains sovereign master. This is their inner world, their reactions, their attitude toward what happens. Warm evening air carried the aromas of grilled fish from the market, sounds of distant conversations, the clatter of hooves on stone pavement. And in the portico, amid this living atmosphere of the city, ideas were born that outlived empires and reached our days. Zeno taught that true freedom is not the ability to do everything you want. It is the skill of not depending on external circumstances for your inner peace. The listeners came varied, rich and poor, young and old, citizens and slaves. All were united by one thing: the thirst to understand how to live so as not to be a toy in the hands of chance, how to maintain dignity in any circumstances, how to find solid ground underfoot in a world where everything constantly changes. The philosophy born in that portico was not complex theory. It was practical wisdom, a tool for life. Zeno and his followers taught not abstract truths, but what could be applied right now, in this moment. when your boss's anger crashes down on you, or a loved one's illness strikes. They spoke of virtue, but not as something unattainable and sacred, but as a skill. Wisdom, justice, courage, moderation. These are not inborn qualities of the chosen few. These are things anyone can develop in themselves, as a musician develops their ear, or a craftsman perfects their mastery. In the portico, there was quiet, despite the proximity of busy streets. A special silence, not the absence of sounds, but the presence of attention. When people truly listen, when every word matters, when speech concerns not superficial things, but what touches the deepest foundations of life. Zeno often used simple examples. He spoke of a traveler who cannot influence the weather, but can choose how to dress, of a farmer who does not control rain, but decides what seeds to sow, of a person who has no power over others' words, but is fully responsible for their own. These images remained in listeners' memories. Returning home along narrow streets lit by flickering torches, they carried with them not complex formulas, but living pictures, something easily recalled in difficult moments, something that helped find support when the ground slipped away underfoot. The philosophy of the portico was a philosophy of acceptance, but not passive resignation, active choice of one's attitude toward the world. Stoics taught that you cannot change the past, but you can choose how to relate to it. You cannot guarantee the future, but you can control your actions in the present. The sun set behind Athenian hills, painting the marble columns in soft golden tones. The portico grew cooler. People gradually dispersed to their homes. But the ideas born here departed on a long journey through centuries. They would find response in the heart of a Roman slave and in an emperor's reflections. They would help people survive wars, losses, exiles. They would become quiet light in dark times. And it all began with simple understanding that happiness is not what happens to you. It is what happens within you. And this is in your hands. There are stories that tell themselves, not through words, but through a person's life, through how they walk, how they look at the world, how they respond to fate's blows. Epictetus was one of such stories. His life became a living example that true freedom does not depend on external circumstances. He was born a slave, in a world where this meant being a thing, property, where your body belongs to another, where your time is not yours, where even thoughts must submit to the master's will. A small boy in Phrygia, in a distant Roman province, where dusty roads led to the unknown, and the sky seemed the only thing that belonged to no one. His name itself spoke of his position. Epictetus is not a name given to a child with love. This word means acquired, purchased, a label reminding every day that you do not belong to yourself. But sometimes what should break a person makes them stronger. The boy was brought to Rome, the city that was the heart of the world, where roads converged from all ends of the empire, where marble palaces neighbored cramped quarters of the poor, where in one house could live a senator and his slaves, free and unfree, but all equally dependent on fate's whims. Epictetus ended up in the house of Epaphroditus, a freedman of Emperor Nero. This was luck, though at the time he did not understand it. Epaphroditus was an educated man who valued knowledge, and something in this young slave caught his attention. Perhaps a special gleam in his eyes, perhaps a thirst for understanding that shone through submission. The master allowed Epictetus to attend philosophers' lectures. In Rome of that time, philosophy was not an academic discipline, but a living practice. People came to sages not for diplomas, but for answers to questions that kept them awake at night. How to live, how to be happy, how to maintain dignity when everything collapses. Epictetus listened, absorbed, understood that words about freedom had special meaning when heard by one deprived of freedom. Stoic ideas that no one can enslave your soul without your consent were for him not abstract theory, but practical truth he tested every day. Teachers spoke of things that depend on us and things that do not depend on us. Your body can be chained, but your mind remains free if you yourself do not surrender it to slavery. They can force you to perform work, but cannot force you to think like a slave if you decide to think like a free person. Epictetus understood this better than many free citizens. He saw how rich Romans became slaves to their passions, their ambitions, their fear of losing position. He saw senators tremble before the emperor's anger, how rich men lost sleep, fearing the loss of fortune, while he, a slave, gained inner independence that many free people never knew. In Epaphroditus's house, Epictetus was lame, either from birth or due to cruel treatment. Sources differ, but this physical peculiarity became part of his philosophy. The body may be imperfect, but the spirit can rise above any limitations. Lameness did not prevent him from being a sage. Slavery did not prevent him from being free. When Emperor Domitian expelled all philosophers from Rome, Epictetus was already a free man. Epaphroditus had released him, recognizing in him not a servant, but a teacher. Epictetus went to Nicopolis, a small town in Greece, where he founded his school. The place was modest, simple buildings, simple life. But here people flocked from across the empire to learn from a man who knew what unfreedom was, and therefore, better than others, understood the value of inner freedom. He taught simply, without complex terms, without abstruse theories. He spoke of what he had experienced himself, of how not to let circumstances break you, of how to find peace within yourself when the whole world around seems hostile. His students recorded every word. They understood they were hearing not theory, but living experience. A man who had passed through slavery and become freer than many free people spoke of what he knew firsthand. He did not invent beautiful words about steadfastness. He lived them every day. Epictetus often repeated a simple thought. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can always control how you react to it. This reaction is your zone of responsibility, your freedom, your power over your own life. In Nicopolis, there were warm evenings when students gathered around their teacher under the starry sky. Quiet conversations about the most important things, questions and answers that concerned not abstract matters, but how to live tomorrow better than today. How to be kind without becoming weak. How to be strong without becoming cruel. Epictetus died a free man, but his main freedom was not that his master freed him, but that he freed himself from anger at circumstances, from self-pity, from the desire for the world to be different. He accepted the world as it is, and in this acceptance found the strength to change it. at least his part of this world. Sometimes the deepest thoughts come at dawn, when the world still sleeps, when silence envelops the earth like a soft blanket, when the first rays of sun only begin to touch the horizon. In such moments, a person remains alone with the most important thing, with themselves and their thoughts. Marcus Aurelius knew these moments better than many, because being emperor means waking up with the burden of responsibility for millions of lives. Imagine a campaign tent on the empire's border, somewhere in the Danubian steppes, where wind carries the scent of wormwood and distant fires, where Roman legions stand encamped, preparing for another battle with barbarian tribes. In this tent, by the light of an oil lamp, the most powerful man in the world takes stylus and wax tablet and writes, not state decrees, not military operation plans, but letters to himself. These notes he showed to no one. They were not intended for the public. This was his personal conversation with himself, an attempt to understand how to remain human when you bear power over half the world, how to preserve wisdom when every decision you make can change the fates of thousands of people. Marcus Aurelius was not born emperor. He grew up as an ordinary boy from a noble family, was fascinated by philosophy, dreamed of a quiet scholar's life. But fate decided otherwise. Emperor Antoninus, pious, adopted him, making him heir to the throne. From that moment, Marcus's life was divided into two parts: external, where he was Caesar, commander, judge, and internal, where he remained a student of ancient sages, a person seeking truth. In his morning notes, he often reflected on how strangely the world is arranged. Here he sits in a gilded palace, and hundreds of people are ready to fulfill his every whim. In a few hours, he will lie in the earth, like any mortal. Today they praise him as the greatest ruler. Tomorrow, someone else will wear Caesar's purple. Everything passes. Everything changes. And understanding this did not make him cynical. On the contrary, it helped him value each day. He wrote to himself as a father writes to a son, as a teacher to a student, as a friend to a friend. Remember that anger is weakness disguised as strength. Remember that people behave badly, not from malice, but from ignorance. Remember that your task is not to punish, but to teach, not to take revenge, but to correct. Dawn in the military camp came slowly. First a gray strip on the horizon, then pink reflections on clouds, then golden light flooding the steppe. Marcus Aurelius observed this transformation and saw in it a lesson. As day replaces night, so in human life some periods replace others. Sorrow is replaced by joy, war by peace, youth by old age, and wisdom lies in accepting these changes, not fighting them. His philosophy was not academic. It was born in campaigns, in negotiations with barbarian chiefs, in court sessions where decisions about life and death had to be made. Stoic principles helped him remain just when it was easier to be cruel. Maintain calm when everyone around panicked. See in every person, even in an enemy, part of a unified whole. He often thought that all people are citizens of one city, not Rome, but the cosmos, the universe. All submit to the same laws of nature. All are born and die. All rejoice and suffer. And if this is so, then there are no strangers. There are only those who have not yet understood their kinship with the rest. In the tent, it was cramped. Simple campaign furniture, weapons in the corner, maps on the table, nothing superfluous. Marcus Aurelius valued simplicity, not from stinginess, but from understanding that unnecessary things distract from the main thing, and the main thing is work on yourself. Daily, patient, like the work of a sculptor who day after day cuts away everything unnecessary to reveal the beauty hidden in stone. He was emperor for 18 years. Years of wars, epidemics, internal troubles. Any other ruler might have become embittered, cynical, decided that people are unworthy of good treatment. But Marcus Aurelius every morning reminded himself that he was a human among humans, that his task was not to use power for personal pleasure, but to serve the common good. His reflections were honest to the point of pain. He did not embellish himself, admitted weaknesses, analyzed his mistakes, but not for self-flagellation, but for understanding. To become better tomorrow than yesterday, to use each day as an opportunity for growth. The sun rose higher. The camp awakened. Soldiers' voices were heard. The clatter of weapons, horses neighing. Marcus Aurelius put away his stylus, stored his tablet. In a few minutes, he would again become Caesar, would make decisions, command, judge. But within him would remain what he discovered for himself in the morning silence. Understanding that real power is power over oneself, and true greatness lies in the ability to remain human in any circumstances. His notes will outlive the empire. When Rome falls, when legions scatter, when palaces turn to ruins, the thoughts of the philosopher emperor will live in people's hearts, because he wrote not about how to govern a state, but about how to govern oneself. And this is an eternal theme. There are people who live at the intersection of worlds, between wealth and wisdom, between power and renunciation, between what they have and what they teach. Lucius Annaeus, Seneca, was exactly such a person. His life is a story of how one can live amid abundance without becoming its prisoner, how to advise emperors while remaining a philosopher, how to accumulate gold while preaching simplicity. In Cordoba, in distant Spanish province, where olive groves stretch to the horizon, and air is saturated with the scents of herbs and sea, was born a boy destined to become one of the richest people of his time and one of humanity's wisest teachers. His father was a rhetorician, a teacher of eloquence, a man who understood the power of words. And this power he passed to his son. Seneca grew up a sickly child. Asthma tormented him from childhood, forcing him to lie long in bed, watching the play of light and shadow on walls, listening to distant street sounds. Perhaps this forced immobility taught him to look within himself, to reflect, to ask questions that healthy children pay no attention to. The family moved to Rome when the boy was still quite young. The city struck him with its scope and contrasts. Luxurious patrician villas neighbored the wretched dwellings of the poor. Marble and gold of palaces reflected in puddles where homeless children splashed. Seneca saw this inequality and understood that wealth is not just money. It is responsibility, power that must be used wisely. He studied philosophy under the best teachers of his time. Stoic ideas captured him completely. The thought that a person can be free in any circumstances, that happiness does not depend on external goods, that wisdom is more precious than gold. All this found response in his soul. But life is more complex than any philosophy, and Seneca was to learn this. Career brought him into the highest circles of Roman society. He became a senator, lawyer, writer. His speeches delighted listeners. His tragedies were staged in theaters. His philosophical letters were read throughout the empire. But the most important appointment was the education of young Nero, the future emperor. Imagine this man who every morning woke up in a luxurious villa on the Palatine Hill. Servants served breakfast on silver plates. Garden around the house were fragrant with rare flowers brought from all ends of the empire. And he sat at the table and wrote a letter to his friend Lucilius about how true wealth is contentment with little. This might seem like hypocrisy, a rich man preaching poverty. But Seneca understood the complexity of his position better than critics. He did not call for destitution. He taught the right attitude toward wealth. Money is a tool. It is neither good nor bad in itself. What matters is how you use it. And even more important is how much you depend on it. Seneca was rich, but not greedy. He spent money on libraries, schools, helping the needy, built roads and aqueducts. But the main thing was he never forgot that all this could disappear in an instant. Wealth is impermanent, like a spring flower. Here today, tomorrow it may be gone. And a wise person does not become so attached to it that its loss becomes catastrophe. His relationship with Nero was complex. Seneca tried to raise him as a wise ruler, but the student's character proved stronger than the teacher's instructions. Nero became increasingly cruel, capricious, unpredictable. Seneca saw how power corrupts a person, how proximity to absolute power makes even reasonable people mad. In the gardens of his villa, where fountains murmured among marble statues, where peacocks strutted across perfectly manicured lawns, Seneca reflected on the paradox of his life. He taught detachment, but was immersed in worldly affairs, preached simplicity, but lived in luxury, called for calm, but was constantly at the center of political storms. But perhaps this was his main wisdom. He understood that philosophy is not escape from the world. It is a way to live in the world without becoming its prisoner. One can have wealth, but not be a slave to wealth, can occupy high posts, but not lose humanity, can advise rulers, but maintain inner independence. His letters to Lucilius became a true treasury of Stoic wisdom. In them, he shared not theoretical knowledge, but living experience, told how to cope with anger when you are unjustly accused, how to survive losses when loved ones die, how to maintain dignity when circumstances do not favor you. He wrote simply, without philosophical complexity, as one friend writes to another, about everyday things familiar to everyone, about how not to let small troubles spoil your day, about how to find joy in simple pleasures, about how to prepare for death without becoming gloomy. The end of his life was dramatic. Nero, suspecting everyone of conspiracies, ordered Seneca to take his own life. The philosopher accepted this sentence calmly. He gathered friends, said goodbye to his wife, opened his veins, and died as he lived, reflecting on the eternal. His last hours became a final lesson in Stoic wisdom. Seneca left behind not only wealth, which quickly dispersed, and not only literary works, which are still read today. He left an example of how one can live at the crossroads of contradictions without losing integrity, how to be rich and wise simultaneously, how to serve power but obey only conscience. In the evening light, when the sun set behind Rome's hills, when shadows grew longer and air filled with coolness, in Seneca's villa, gardens' quiet conversations about the most important things were heard, about what remains when everything else goes away, about what truly belongs to a person in this life. And the answer was always one: your soul, your choice, your attitude toward what happens. At the very heart of Stoic philosophy lies a simple truth that each of us discovers anew. Usually, this happens in moments when life confronts us with the fact of our powerlessness. When we understand that we cannot change what has already happened, cannot force other people to act as we wish, cannot stop time or turn it back. In such moments, the wisdom of discernment is born. Imagine a farmer in ancient Italy. He rises before dawn, when air is still cool and saturated with morning dew, goes to his field where wheat stalks sway in the wind. He can plow the earth, sow grain, water shoots, weed out weeds, but he cannot force rain to fall exactly when needed, cannot stop hail if it decides to destroy the harvest, cannot command the sun to shine exactly as much as plants require. A wise farmer concentrates on what is in his power, does everything he can, and accepts what does not depend on him. He does not waste energy on anger against bad weather, does not curse the sky for drought, does not blame the earth for poor harvest. He works with what there is and finds peace in understanding the limits of his possibilities. Epictetus, who knew this discernment better than many, taught his listeners in Nicopolis a simple exercise. Each morning, waking up, think about the day ahead. Mentally divide everything that might happen into two groups. What depends on you and what does not depend on you. The first is your zone of responsibility. The second is the area of acceptance. Your thoughts depend on you. Your words depend on you. Your actions depend on you. Your attitude toward what happens depends on you. This is your territory, where you are sovereign master. Here you can do everything, can choose what to think about, can decide what to say and what to keep silent, can determine how to react to any situation. But other people's thoughts do not depend on you. Their words and actions do not either. Weather, politics, market prices, your boss's opinion of your work, illness, and health, past and future. All this lies beyond your control. You can influence, yes, but you cannot completely control. In this discernment lies great freedom. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, enormous energy is freed up for what is truly in your hands. You no longer waste strength trying to change other people. Instead, you work on yourself. Do not fight circumstances, but seek the best way to act within them. Marcus Aurelius, in his morning reflections, often returned to this theme. He wrote himself reminders, like a child afraid of forgetting an important rule. Today, I will meet people who are intrusive, ungrateful, insolent. But this is their problem, not mine. My task is to remain human, to be just even if others are unjust, to be kind even if others are evil. This does not mean passivity. Stoics did not teach submission to injustice or acceptance of any evil as inevitable. They taught wise action. Do what you can to make the world better, but do not become so attached to the results of your efforts that failure breaks you. Seneca explained this to his friend Lucilius through a simple example. You shoot a bow. You can choose the bow, draw the string, aim, release the arrow. All this is in your power. But whether the arrow hits the target depends not only on you. Wind might blow. Your hand might tremble. The target might move. A wise archer concentrates on the process, not the result. In daily life, this discernment manifests constantly. You can control what you eat, but cannot guarantee you will not get sick. Can choose how to relate to criticism, but cannot force people to praise you. Can decide how much time to spend on work, but cannot compel your boss to value it. Stoics taught that happiness comes not when everything goes according to your plan, but when you stop demanding that the world conform to your expectations. When you work with what there is, rather than fighting what is not there. In ancient Rome, where people constantly depended on emperors' whims, on changes in politics, on wars and epidemics, this teaching was especially relevant. People understood that the only thing that truly belonged to them was their inner world, and they learned to arrange it so that no external storms could destroy it. In the evening, when the day ended, Stoics often conducted something like a post-flight briefing. They recalled the past day and analyzed their reactions. In what situations did they try to control the uncontrollable? Where did they waste energy in vain? When did they act wisely? And when did they give in to emotions? This was not self-flagellation. This was a practice of self-knowledge, a way to better understand the boundaries of one's possibilities and learn to act within them more effectively. Each day is a new opportunity to apply ancient wisdom of discernment. Each situation is a chance to choose wisdom instead of fuss. The sun sets beyond the horizon, regardless of our wishes. Seasons change each other according to their laws. People are born and die, rejoice and grieve, commit wise and foolish acts. All this is part of life's great flow, which is much larger than any of us. But in this flow, there is a small island that completely belongs to you. Your reaction to everything that happens. And this is enough for happiness. What makes a person truly rich? Gold in chests, lands stretching to the horizon, palaces with marble columns, or something else? What cannot be stolen? What will not depreciate with time? What remains with you even when everything else disappears? Ancient Stoics knew the answer to this question. A person's only true wealth is their character. In Rome, during the Empire, the contrasts of wealth and poverty were especially vivid. Along the streets simultaneously walked patricians in snow-white togas studded with precious stones, and slaves in torn clothing carrying heavy loads. In one quarter stood luxurious villas with gardens and fountains. In another, wretched hovels where several families huddled in one room. But Stoics saw what was hidden behind external differences. They noticed how a rich person could be unhappy, constantly fearing the loss of their fortune, how they became slaves to their own property, spending their whole life accumulating and guarding it, while nearby a simple craftsman, content with his modest earnings, lived each day with joy and gratitude. Epictetus, who himself had passed the path from slavery to freedom, better than many understood that external circumstances do not determine a person's inner state. He saw slaves who were freer than their masters, and free citizens who were enslaved by their passions, fears, desires. What then is true wealth according to Stoic teaching? It is a set of qualities that no one can take from you. Wisdom, the ability to see things as they are, neither embellishing nor darkening them. Justice, the skill to act rightly, even when it is disadvantageous. Courage, readiness to do what is necessary despite fear. Moderation, the ability to be content with what you have, not envying others. These 4 virtues Stoics called cardinal, primary. As 4 cardinal directions determine direction, so these qualities determine a person's character. And most amazing, anyone can develop them in themselves. It does not matter if you are rich or poor, young or old, healthy or sick. Access to true wealth is open to all. Seneca often reflected on this paradox in his letters. He was one of the richest people in the empire, but constantly reminded himself and others that money is only a tool. A hammer can build a house or destroy it, depending on whose hands it is in. So too, wealth can serve good or evil, can liberate or enslave. A wise person uses material goods to help others, develop arts, build schools and libraries. They understand that wealth gives them opportunities, but does not make them better than others. And most importantly, they are always ready to renounce it if circumstances require. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful person of his time, each morning reminded himself that power and wealth are temporary roles he plays. As an actor on stage puts on a costume for a performance and takes it off after the show, so he wore Caesar's purple without forgetting that underneath was an ordinary person of flesh and blood. True wealth cannot be measured in numbers. It is not stored in banks. It does not depreciate during crises. On the contrary, the more you share it, the more it becomes. When you teach someone wisdom, you become wiser yourself. When you act justly, you strengthen justice in yourself. When you show courage, you become braver. In daily life, this means very simple things. Meeting a rude person and responding politely is a manifestation of your wealth. Helping someone in trouble without expecting gratitude is an investment in your character. Telling the truth when lying would be more profitable is spending your true capital for its multiplication. Stoics taught practical exercises for developing inner wealth. Each evening, analyze the past day. In what situations did you act wisely, and where did you give in to weakness? Regularly imagine losing everything material to value what you have, and not fear what you might lose. Seek opportunities to help others, because generosity strengthens the giver's character. They also practiced what could be called voluntary poverty. From time to time, they lived very simply, ate simple food, slept on hard beds, wore modest clothing, not from asceticism, but to remind themselves that happiness does not depend on comfort, that a person can be content under any conditions if they have the right attitude toward life. in the gardens of Roman villas, where marble statues reflected in clear pool water, where rare birds sang in golden cages, Stoic philosophers reflected on how all this beauty is temporary. Statues will crumble, gardens will overgrow, birds will die. But what a person created in their soul: wisdom, kindness, courage. This will outlive centuries. In the evening, when the last rays of sun painted the sky in gentle pink tones, when the air was filled with the scent of blooming roses, and the quiet murmur of fountains was heard, Roman Stoics gathered for conversations about the most important things, not about grain prices or political intrigues, but about how to become richer, not in wallet, but in soul, how to accumulate treasures that will remain with you forever. In ancient Rome, there existed a custom that might seem strange and gloomy to modern people. During triumphal processions, when a victorious general rode through the capital's streets under the crowd's enthusiastic cries, beside him stood a slave who from time to time whispered in his ear, "Remember that you are mortal. Memento mori. Remember death." This was not cruelty or an attempt to spoil the celebration. This was wisdom, a reminder that any glory is temporary, any power transient, any life finite. And this understanding, paradoxically, made life more valuable and each moment more significant. Stoic philosophers were not gloomy pessimists, as sometimes thought. They simply understood what the modern world tries to forget, that death is part of life, not its opposite, but a natural conclusion. As day gives way to night, as winter transitions to spring, so life transitions to death. And there is nothing terrible in this if one correctly understands the nature of things. Epictetus, who knew the price of each day, taught his listeners in Nicopolis a simple exercise. Each morning, waking up, say to yourself, "Perhaps this is my last day," not to frighten yourself or fall into despair, but to live it as if it really were the last, so as not to waste time on trifles, to say important words to those you love, to do what truly matters. Imagine how this changes attitude toward life. Will you spend precious hours on meaningless arguments if you know time is short? Will you postpone a conversation with a loved one until tomorrow? Will you get angry over trifles that tomorrow will no longer matter? Marcus Aurelius, in his morning reflections, often returned to this theme. He wrote himself reminders that the imperial power he bears is a temporary role, that the purple he wears will soon be worn by another, that all his decrees and decisions will eventually be forgotten, and what remains is only what kind of person he was. He reflected on how quickly generations pass. There were his grandfather and father. Now they are gone. There he lives himself, and soon he will be no more. Others will come who will engage in the same affairs, rejoice in the same joys, experience the same sorrows, and then they too will leave, giving way to the next. But in this understanding of transience was not despair, but liberation. If everything is temporary, then it is not worth taking failures too seriously. If life is short, then each lived day must be valued. If death is inevitable, then one must live so as not to be ashamed of the years lived. Seneca, in his letters, often told how reflections on death help him make decisions. When you remember the finiteness of time, it is easier to distinguish important from unimportant. When you know that not so many days remain, you do not want to spend them on what brings neither joy nor benefit. He taught his friend Lucilius an exercise called premeditatio malorum, preliminary reflection on the bad. Each day, devote some time to thoughts about what you might lose: health, loved ones, wealth, position in society. Not to attract troubles, but to be prepared for them and value what you have now. When you mentally say goodbye to a loved one, you value more the time spent with them. When you imagine loss of health, you begin to thank your body for each day without pain. When you think about possible poverty, you stop taking prosperity for granted. In Rome, where life was full of dangers, epidemics, wars, political upheavals, people especially acutely understood the fragility of human existence. A rich patrician could wake up in the morning in a luxurious villa and by evening find himself in exile or even in the grave. An emperor who seemed all-powerful could fall victim to conspiracy. But Stoics saw in this unpredictability not a reason for fear, but a lesson in wisdom. since one cannot rely on external circumstances, happiness must be built on what chance cannot destroy, on one's character, on one's principles, on the ability to find peace within oneself. Roman Stoics often visited cemeteries, not from gloominess, but for reflection. They read epitaphs on tombstones, thought about the lives of those resting here, rich and poor, noble and common, young and old, all ultimately come to the same end. And this equality before death reminded them what truly matters in life. They understood that death is not an enemy to be feared. It is a teacher who helps correctly prioritize. When you know time is limited, you do not want to spend it on hatred. You want to forgive. You do not want to accumulate grievances. You want to love. You do not want to postpone important matters. You want to act. In the gardens of Roman villas, where among blooming roses stood marble statues, philosophers reflected that beauty too is temporary. These flowers will wither in a few days. These statues will crumble in a few centuries. But the beauty of a human deed, the beauty of a noble thought, the beauty of a loving heart, this will outlive any marble. Evening air carried the aromas of dinner, sounds of distant music, children's voices playing in neighboring houses. All this ordinary, everyday life seemed especially precious to one who remembered its fragility. How precious is a child's laughter when you know childhood is short? How important are a loved one's words when you understand that not all conversations will yet take place? Reflections on death taught Stoics not only how to live correctly, but how to die correctly. When the time came, they met death calmly, as one meets an old acquaintance, without fear, without despair, without regrets about the unfinished, because they knew they had lived their lives worthily, used the time given to them as intended. In ancient Rome, where life was often cruel and unpredictable, where a person's fate could change in an instant, Stoic philosophy offered a radical idea. What if we stop resisting what happens? What if instead of fighting fate, we learn to accept it? Not passively, not submissively, but actively, with understanding and even gratitude. This teaching was called amor fati, love of fate. And this was not a call to resignation before injustice or refusal to try to change the world for the better. This was a deep philosophical position based on understanding that the universe is arranged reasonably, that everything happening has its meaning, even if we do not see it. Imagine a weaver working on a huge carpet. Sitting next to him, you see only a small fragment of the pattern. Individual threads seem random. Colors do not match. The design looks meaningless. But the weaver sees the entire carpet. He knows that each thread, even the most inconspicuous, is needed to create overall beauty. So too, human life is part of a much larger pattern. Events that seem like misfortunes to us may be necessary elements of general harmony. Job loss can lead to discovering a new calling. Illness can teach us to value health and empathize with sufferers. Separation from a loved one can help understand what true love is. Epictetus, who himself passed through slavery and found inner freedom in it, better than many understood this truth. He taught his listeners, "Do not say that misfortune befell you. Say that you were given an opportunity to show what you are capable of. Each difficulty is an exam in wisdom, courage, patience." Marcus Aurelius, who had to govern the empire in difficult times, wars, epidemics, uprisings, each morning reminded himself of this principle. What happens today does not happen by chance. This is part of a great plan that I cannot understand completely, but can accept with dignity. He reflected that even the most unpleasant people he had to deal with played their role in his spiritual development. A rude senator teaches him patience. A flattering courtier teaches the ability to distinguish truth from falsehood. A cruel enemy teaches courage and steadfastness. Amor fati does not mean refusal to act. On the contrary, accepting what happens, a person frees themselves from inner resistance and can act more effectively. When you do not waste energy on anger about the situation, you have more strength to understand it and find the best way out. Seneca explained this principle through the image of a dog tied to a cart. The dog can run alongside the cart voluntarily, and then its journey will be easy and pleasant. Or it can resist and struggle, and then it will be dragged by force. But the cart will still go in the same direction. A wise person, like a smart dog, runs in the direction life is moving, but runs by their own will. In daily life, amor fati manifests in simple things: got caught in rain without an umbrella, instead of irritation, feel the freshness of water on skin. Missed the train. Use the unexpectedly appeared time for reflection or reading. Got sick. Give the body rest it may have long been asking for. This does not mean passivity or refusal to plan. Stoics planned, worked, strived for goals, but they did not become so attached to results that failure could break them. They understood that human plans are suggestions that life can accept or reject. Roman Stoics practiced special exercises for developing amor fati. In the morning, they mentally prepared for the day to not go according to plan. In the evening, they analyzed in which situations they resisted what was happening, and in which they accepted it with wisdom. They learned to see in each event an opportunity for growth. Praise develops humility so as not to become conceited. Criticism develops wisdom to understand if there is a grain of truth in it. Losses develop detachment so as not to become attached to the temporary. Gains develop generosity to remember those less fortunate. In the gardens of Roman villas, where evening wind rustled olive leaves, where fountains quietly murmured surrounded by marble statues, philosophers reflected on the great mystery of acceptance. How to turn resistance into cooperation with life. How to find in each day, even the most difficult, reason for gratitude. They understood that amor fati is not a one-time decision, but daily practice. Each day brings us new challenges, new opportunities for acceptance or resistance. And each time, a person can choose to be a victim of circumstances or their student. Stars in the Roman sky shone as they had thousands of years ago, and as they will shine thousands of years hence. In their unchanging movement, Stoics saw an image of cosmic order, of which each person is a part. To accept one's fate means to take one's place in this order, not as a slave, but as a conscious participant in a great design. In the 21st century, in a world of skyscrapers and internet, smartphones and social networks, the ancient wisdom of Stoics seems especially relevant, perhaps precisely because modern life, despite all technical achievements, has not become simpler, and in many ways has become even more complex than it was 2,000 years ago. A Roman citizen in the time of Marcus Aurelius worried about wars on the empire's borders, epidemics, political intrigues. Modern people worry about economic crises, environmental problems, information overload. Then people feared barbarians at Rome's gates. Today, terrorism and cyber threats. Forms have changed, but the essence remains the same. Life is full of uncertainty, and people need wisdom to navigate it. In modern megacities, where millions of people rush about their business, where life's rhythm becomes ever faster and demands ever higher, Stoic principles offer an island of calm, not external comfort, but inner peace, not escape from reality, but wise interaction with it. Imagine a modern person riding to work in a crowded subway. Around them, crowds, noise, rush. People are irritated, tense, absorbed in their smartphones. But they remember Epictetus's words that no one can spoil your day without your consent. That external chaos should not create internal chaos. That one can remain calm even in the most bustling crowd. Or imagine an employee unjustly criticized by their boss. Instead of wasting energy on anger and resentment, they remember Marcus Aurelius's teaching that people behave badly, not from malice, but from ignorance. That their task is not to change the boss, but to react correctly to the situation. Maintain dignity, extract a lesson, continue working with quality. Modern psychologists are rediscovering what Stoics knew 2,000 years ago. That happiness depends not on external circumstances, but on our attitude toward them. That we cannot control what happens to us, but can always control our reaction. That accepting the inevitable frees energy for changing the possible. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most effective directions in modern psychology, is largely based on Stoic principles. The idea that our emotions are determined not by events, but by our thoughts about events. That by changing the way of thinking, one can change quality of life. In the era of social networks, when people constantly compare themselves with others, the Stoic teaching that the only true wealth is character sounds especially relevant. Number of likes does not make a person happier. An expensive car does not guarantee respect. Fashionable clothes do not solve internal problems. Modern Stoics, and there are more and more such people, adapt ancient practices to the realities of our time. Instead of morning reflections by candlelight, they keep gratitude journals in mobile applications. Instead of walks through Roman porticos, they practice mindfulness in city parks. Instead of letters to friends, they share wisdom in blogs and podcasts. But the essence remains unchanged. Each day is an opportunity to become better. Each difficulty is a chance to manifest wisdom. Each interaction with people is practice in patience and kindness. Each evening is time for analysis and gratitude. In a world where information updates every second, where news is often alarming, where the future seems uncertain, Stoic philosophy offers solid ground underfoot, not in the form of ready answers to all questions, but in the form of principles that help find these answers independently. Modern followers of Stoicism unite in communities, hold conferences, write books. But the most important happens not at public events, but in daily life. When a person encountering failure does not fall into despair, but seeks a lesson in it. When they choose kindness instead of anger, courage instead of fear, wisdom instead of impulsiveness. In quiet evenings, when modern megacities finally fall asleep, when the noise of cars subsides and skyscraper lights go out, people around the world open books of ancient philosophers, or simply sit in silence, reflecting on the day lived. They ask themselves the same questions that Roman Stoics asked. How did I act today? Where did I manifest wisdom? And where did I give in to weakness? What can I do better tomorrow? And in these reflections, in this striving for wisdom and virtue, ancient Athens meets the modern world. Epictetus extends his hand to a programmer from Silicon Valley. Marcus Aurelius shares experience with a manager from London City. Seneca writes a letter to a teacher from a provincial town. Because human nature has not changed over 2 millennia, we still seek meaning, still struggle with difficulties, still strive for happiness, and the ancient wisdom of Stoics is still relevant, still able to help us find peace in the storm of modern life. There are places on earth where time seems to freeze, where ancient stones preserve memory of people who lived thousands of years ago, but whose thoughts are still alive and relevant. Athens, where under marble columns Stoic philosophy was born. Rome, where emperors reflected on the transience of power. Nicopolis, where a former slave taught freedom. But the main place where Stoic wisdom lives is the human heart. It does not matter what century you were born in, what country you live in, what language you think in. What matters is only whether you are ready to accept a simple truth. Happiness is not what happens to you, but how you relate to what happens. The modern world offers many paths to happiness. Buy this, achieve that, become such. But Stoics 2,000 years ago understood what many still do not understand. All these external paths lead nowhere, because they depend on circumstances we do not control. And true happiness can only be where we have complete power in our inner world. Imagine a person who every morning, waking up, remembers 3 simple things. First, I cannot control what will happen today, but I can control my attitude toward what happens. Second, my task is to be the best version of myself, regardless of how others act. Third, each day is a gift that may be the last, so it must be lived worthily. Such a person walks through life differently. They do not fuss when something does not go according to plan, because they understand plans are only suggestions that life can accept or reject. They do not get angry at others' stupidity or malice, because they know everyone acts based on their understanding of good, even if this understanding is mistaken. They are grateful for what they have, because they understand everything in this world is temporary, and each moment must be valued while it lasts. They are generous because they know true wealth is not in what you have accumulated, but in what you have given. They are courageous because they understand avoiding all difficulties is impossible, but one can meet them with dignity. Stoic philosophy is not a set of rules to be memorized. It is a way of life to be lived each day. As a musician, daily plays scales to maintain technique, so a Stoic daily exercises in wisdom, so it does not abandon them in difficult moments. In the morning, before beginning the day, they reflect on what awaits them, not to foresee everything. This is impossible, but to tune themselves to the right mood. Remind themselves of their principles. Prepare to meet any trials with calm and wisdom. during the day, in the thick of affairs and worries, they remember the main thing. When someone is rude, this is an opportunity to show patience. When something goes wrong, a chance to demonstrate flexibility. When success comes, a moment for gratitude and modesty. Each situation becomes an exercise in virtue. In the evening, they analyze the day lived, not for self-flagellation, but for learning. Where did they act wisely? What could have been done better? What emotions possessed them, and were they justified? This evening, analysis is not a trial of oneself, but a friendly conversation with oneself, an attempt to become a little better tomorrow than today. In the ancient Portico, where 2,000 years ago Zeno first spoke of Stoic wisdom, today tourists with cameras walk. They take selfies against the backdrop of ancient columns, but few of them know what ideas were born in this place. What deep philosophy hides behind simple words about acceptance and wisdom. But this is not important, because the true Portico of Stoics is not in stone, but in the soul of each person who chooses wisdom instead of foolishness, kindness instead of anger, courage instead of fear. Everyone who understands the difference between what can be changed and what must be accepted builds in their heart the columns of eternal philosophy. In a world where everything changes with incredible speed, where yesterday's truths become today's delusions, Stoic wisdom remains unchanged, because it is based not on temporary circumstances, but on the eternal nature of humanity, on what was relevant for a Roman emperor and a modern programmer, for an ancient slave and today's millionaire. The power of Stoicism lies in its simplicity. No need to study complex theories for years, or perform difficult-to-accomplish practices. You simply need to remember a few simple truths each day and try to apply them. Control what you can control. Accept what cannot be changed. Be grateful for what you have. Treat others as you would want to be treated. When the sun sets beyond the horizon, painting the sky in soft pastel tones, when day transitions to evening and evening prepares to become night, somewhere in the world, people open books of ancient philosophers. They read wise words written 2,000 years ago and find in them answers to today's questions. Somewhere a programmer from Silicon Valley, tired of the endless race for success, discovers Marcus Aurelius's reflections that true greatness lies in the ability to remain human. Somewhere, a teacher from a small town reads Seneca's letters and understands that their work is not just transmitting knowledge, but educating character. Somewhere, a mother who has lost a child finds comfort in Epictetus's words that we come to this world not as owners, but as guests, and should be grateful for each day given to us. Somewhere, an elderly person facing illness remembers the Stoic teaching that death is not an enemy, but part of life, and finds peace in this. Stoic philosophy does not promise an easy life. It does not guarantee that nothing bad will happen to you. It offers something more valuable, inner freedom, that no one can take from you. The ability to find peace in any storm. The skill to be happy, not because everything is going well, but because you have learned to relate correctly to what is going badly. In the silence of night, when the world falls asleep, when the day's bustle gives way to calm, ancient wisdom continues its journey through centuries. It is transmitted not through books and lectures, but through the living example of people who each day try to be better, who choose understanding instead of condemnation, patience instead of anger, courage instead of fear. And perhaps right now, reading these lines, you feel how something changes in your understanding of life, how simple truths spoken by long-dead philosophers suddenly become alive and relevant, how ancient wisdom finds response in your heart. This is the true miracle of Stoicism. That philosophy, born in an ancient Portico, continues to live in people's hearts. That a Roman emperor's thoughts help a modern person cope with difficulties. That a former slave's words give strength to one who feels unfree. Because at the foundation of Stoic philosophy lies not complex theory, but simple love. Love of wisdom, love of humanity, love of life in all its manifestations. And this love, like life itself, is eternal.